Connor Ryan is an incredible skier, an activist, an advocate. He, like on skis, he does some of the most sort of improbable things you could imagine. He navigates these dangerous situations, like in a sort of way that makes it look super grateful. And certainly the rest of his work that when he's not skiing, that he's doing, in terms of pushing for the idea of land back, all this, those are difficult things. I've had the privilege of having a career where I've gotten to work with people that do difficult things, whether that's through outdoor athleticism or whether that's through advocating for conservation. And the thing is I think sometimes like they're heroes, the people that make it look so easy. We don't always understand that inside there is always a struggle, that there's always something deeper there. I think about it when you see somebody, like Philippe Petit, the man who walked across the Twin Towers in 1974. And, here's this person walking a tightrope, and they look perfectly balanced. They look perfectly at ease. But inside, there are a million little muscles that are fighting, that are striving, that are counteracting each other. And I think that's worth keeping in mind as you watch Connor come up here, because he is so graceful, and it's an honor to have him here. So just keep that in mind, that inside there's so much work being done. There's so much struggle, and you make it look easy. And like, we appreciate you because we know it's not. So Connor Ryan, everyone.
Mitagiape. Chante washte nape shazapelo. Connor Ryan amachiape. Ma lakota hukpapa oshpaye. Etrange heska. What I said to you all there is, I greet you with a good hand and a good heart, my relatives. My name's Connor Ryan. I'm Hukpapa Lakota, and I come from Heska, or as you probably know them, the Rocky Mountains. And it's an honor to get to be here with you all today, to get to share. And I just want to do one thing before I get going into it too much. If I could ask those of you who are standing at the edges or at the back who don't have a spot to come find a seat. There's like a bunch over here, tons of empty tables. We're gonna be here an hour, so I just want to invite you to just find a space, get comfortable. This is you guys call it a keynote speech, but for me, I think it's really important and want to make space as we do this today for this to be a dialogue, for there to be reciprocity here. Because to me, that's what all this work is about. I'm confined in the space of giving a speech by fate, by circumstance, to have to do this in the English language, right? And so these words are a little foreign to my mouth, and not because I grew up speaking Lakota, much the opposite, but because I realized what the constraints of the language and the systems that we have to work through are. But the one thing that I really try to invite in all of my work, and really is going to be my invitation to all of you, is to find the ways that you're going to invite that into your work. Because what we're doing here is we're not just growing a new economy in a space, right? We're here in Duluth, and so much of what I've heard in these last few days is about this idea of, this was an industrial place. And in a lot of ways, that the growth and the boom and the bust of industry failed this place in some ways, right? As I went around yesterday, the first place they took me, after stopping for tacos, the first place they took me was to Spirit Mountain, right, to ride. And they took me out on these trails, right, by these cogs, by these folks making these Gijigumi trails, right? And they talked about how once upon a time the plan was that all this hillside was going to be developed. It was going to be more industry, right? It was going to be more houses, all these things. We're going to fill it out. And that didn't happen, right? And that was once looked at as this failure of this place, of, this iron mining town, it's gone to the wayside, right? And now someone else's failure is the resource that you all have in front of you. And I think it's really amazing for you to get to see that as a resource. But and that's a really important step. And the next step that I want you guys to join me in taking is to figure out how to not just see this place as a resource, but how to embrace it, how to respect it, and how to treat it as a relative, because that's what it truly is. And while so many of you here are present to grow this economic opportunity that's in front of you, I think what's maybe even more important, and maybe to some of you is this first added benefit, and to others of you is the prize that you dream about, is protecting the ecology more than just growing the economy. And learning how over time, I think you're going to be able to see that the ecology is actually a more valuable economy than the one that you have currently. But I'll start first by just by telling you a little bit about myself. Could you guys go to the next slide for me? Does this thing do the slides? Oh, cool. So this is me. This is a little bit of what I get to do when I go to work, right? And this is in my backyard in Silverton, Colorado. I live in Winter Park, but this is my home away from home in a place that's called the Wemanooch. And this was filmed a few years ago as we were working on a piece called Spirit of the Peaks. It's a movie I made. You could check it out. It's I made it with REI. And this mountain range, as I said, is called the Wemanooch. And we wanted to film here. Part of it is a wilderness area, right? And we went to the Forest Service and we said, we're making a movie with the Ute Mountain Ute. The Ute Mountain Ute tribe, their name for themselves is the Wemanooch. And we said we'd like to film in the Wemanooch wilderness. And this is just outside the wilderness, which is why you get to watch it. I said I'm a native director. I'm working with the tribe. I have the tribe's approval. Can I film in the Wemanooch wilderness area? And the answer that they gave me was no. And I just found that to be this ironic thing that, we name a place after a tribe. And then when we go to work with the tribes, we're denied access for the reasons that they give you for not being able to film in the wilderness is you have to have an ecological imperative. You can go to the next slide. You have to have an ecological imperative, a reason to work in the wilderness why you couldn't do what you do anywhere else. But there was no cultural imperative allowed that allowed us to overwrite that and to make a change. And I think for me and in my story, it's really only the cultural imperative that's going to allow us to have the changes that we need ecologically. So a little bit about myself. I was born in Boulder, Colorado. My mom is Lakota, and my dad is a Irish white guy from Youngstown, Ohio, who moved out to Colorado. His dad was a real estate investor, and he worked in a couple of beautiful places that inspired him. The two of which were Pagosa Springs in Colorado and Boulder, Colorado. But really my story starts, kind of long before myself. So my great grandfather was someone who rode into battle with Sitting Bull at the Greasy Grass, as you guys probably know it as Custer's Last Stand, or the Battle of Little Bighorn, right? And my grandfather was born on the Standing Rock Reservation near between Porcupine and Shields, North Dakota, if any of you know where that is. It's interesting being from, having your family be from Standing Rock, because my whole life I said, my family's from Standing Rock Reservation. We're Standing Rock Sioux. That was before I even knew to call myself Lakota. I believe that Sioux is actually probably a word that the Ojibwe and other tribes that were to the east of us had for us, and it's a little bit derogatory. They didn't really like us, and for the reasons of we were a warrior people, we were a courageous people, and my grandfather, he had those things taken from him, that legacy of knowing that he was even Lakota instead of Sioux. They took him to the boarding schools when he was just a boy, just a toddler, really. And from those boarding schools, he ended up enlisted into the Navy in World War II at the age of 15, where he went on to be a POW, a prisoner of war, on the Pacific Front. And it really imparted his life with a lot of trauma, that my mom had to carry, trauma that I had to carry. And so while I didn't grow up on the reservation, and that allowed me access that others didn't have, which is maybe the reason I get to be a skier today, it also put me in the position that I didn't have access to my culture growing up. I went to school, just outside of Boulder, Colorado. I went to little Erie High School, which was just in a field out once upon a time, and now is surrounded by a sea of suburbs. And I was the only Native kid on my cross-country team. There was maybe one other Native kid in my school. And when I showed up for the first day of cross-country practice, there had been a Native kid on the team the year before me, and he'd moved away. And I was like, oh, yeah, tell me about this guy. And they were like, oh, yeah, Chief? Yeah, he was awesome. And they told me these stories of this guy, and they all called him Chief. That wasn't his name. I never got to even know his name. And for that reason, I was like, I'm not telling these people that I'm Native. I'm not. And I spent a lot of my life in that space as a young man of just being like, that's something I talk about at home. I remember a time when I was in the 5th grade. My stepdad was white, and had this mentality of like, oh, maybe there's somewhere we could live for free. And we looked into moving back to this piece of land that belongs to my family on the Standing Rock Reservation. And when he figured out it wasn't a good opportunity, it was another time to just put that paperwork back in the cabinet and forget about that. And that was a lot of how my life went until I went to college. And, when I went to my first semester, I think I passed one class. And ironically enough, which is maybe like it was all the information I needed, but the only class that I passed was public speaking. I gave my final presentation on why we should legalize marijuana. So that's kind of what kind of kid I was at that point in my life. But the other class I was taking at the time was a political science class. I wanted to become maybe a lawyer someday, I thought, or a politician or something, right? And my final presentation that I had to give at the end of that class, we all got randomly assigned a subject. And, drawn from a hat, the card that I pulled was the topic of why is voter engagement so low in Native American communities. And it kind of struck me as odd, and it was, one of the first times, maybe since I made like a diorama of Custer's Last Stand in the 8th grade, that I've found myself there on the internet, Googling my own culture, Googling my own history. And it was the first time in my life that I'd really pulled up the facts, and I'd pulled up the numbers. And I'll never forget sitting in front of this tiny little laptop computer I had at the time. It was like when the little notebook ones were popular. And looking at this little screen and reading off of it, the estimates said as many as 10 million Native Americans were killed, were genocided, so that we could have this country that we have. And I didn't finish the presentation, and I didn't go back to the class, and I dropped out of school. And I found myself kind of listless in the world. I was struggling with addiction. I was just really doing like whatever odd jobs I could to get by. I was a bit of a hustler. I was on the edge of being lost. And some of you will have heard, who were at the podcast last night, will have heard a little bit of this story. But I thought I had my life on the right track. I was driving to California with a good friend of mine who was from Atlanta, and we were driving out there. We were on the straight and narrow. We were gonna go work on a weed farm and just trim weed, and that was the gig we had lined up for ourselves. And we're driving down I-70, the interstate through Colorado. Which, if any of you have ever come out to Colorado to go skiing, I'm sure that you spent an unplanned 3 hours in traffic there on I-70. But as we drove past Copper Mountain with my friend who was from Atlanta, we saw copper out to the left-hand side of us. And it was kind of early fall at that time. And so it looks like, just this mountain with like strips shaved out of it. And he'd never seen a ski area before, and he took a look at it, and he was like, "What is that place? What do they do there?" And I was like, "Oh man, that's a ski resort." And to me, 19 years old, Native American, to him, he was 25, black, and from Atlanta. I laughingly joked to him, and I was like, "Yeah, like we don't belong there. They would never allow us to be in that place." And I told him a little bit about skiing. I tried it when I was a kid. I grew up in Boulder, so just 30 minutes down the way from kind of the spirit mountain of Colorado, if you will, which is Eldora, our smallest but in many ways most special little ski hill that we have. And I'd been really good at it from ages about 5 to 10, and had the opportunity to go because my dad was white. He loved it. My mom's like the most notoriously bad skier on earth, and so she was given a pin by my stepdad that she would wear on her coat. Anytime that she was brought out skiing, she'd take like an obligatory one run before she sat in the lodge and drank hot cocoa, and the pin he'd put on her lapel said, "No bitching." And those were kind of my defining understandings of what skiing was that it was something that was going to be out of reach for me in my life for the rest of what I did. And about a year later, unfortunately, my good friend ended up going to jail. And that fall, I decided that I was going to take it upon myself to figure out how to get up to Copper Mountain. And so I worked and I saved all my money for probably about 6 months so that I could buy what we used to have. It was called before the Epic or the Icon, there was the Rocky Mountain Super Pass. And I bought myself a ski pass. I bought myself the cheapest little pair of skis they had at REI and some boots and all these things. And I found my way out onto the hill for myself and for him, and to reclaim that space and to find a piece of belonging for myself. And that was the first fall in my life when I had really dedicated some energy, in large part because one of my closest friends was in prison. I dedicated a lot of energy to getting sober. And a big part of that for me was returning home to the Black Hills of South Dakota for the first time. And I actually went there for a hip-hop concert. There was an artist performing. Some of you may have heard him. His name is Superman, and he performs, rap music in full powwow regalia. And to me at the time, that was kind of just this insane merging of the worlds of like who I'd been and what I thought I could be. And so I went out there to see him, to listen to this music that to me was, revolutionary in this moment. And I met these folks all the way in South Dakota who held a sweat lodge near Boulder, Colorado. And they were there. They were raising awareness for this project they were doing at the time. They were trying to change the name of a place in the Black Hills, the tallest mountain in that mountain range. And it's actually the tallest mountain between the Rockies and the Alps. And at the time it was called Harney Peak. And it was named after General William Selby Harney, who led the Blue Water Massacre in northern Nebraska. And at the Blue Water Massacre, General Harney massacred 86 women and children of the Lakota Nation who belonged to the Little Thunder tribe, or like the band of the Little Thunder people. And the two men leading this lodge, leading this movement, leading these ceremonies, were Phil Little Thunder, who's an amazing elder uncle of mine, and another uncle of mine who's the descendant of General William Selby Harney. His name's Paul Stover Soderman. And I met these two men who were trying to do this incredibly difficult thing at the time. At that time, there'd only really been like one prominent name change that had happened, and that was changing McKinley to Denali. And I think a lot of us now, Denali in the outdoor community is such a place, and that's the name we call it by. That we forget that it bore that colonizer's name for a long time. But these men, they insisted that I would come to Sweat Lodge. And the Sweat Lodge they held, there was this teepee off the side of the road, and further back into the woods in the Aspen Grove, this humble little half of a dome that was covered in, to me, it kind of looked like rags almost. It was covered in old parachutes. And I would show up to this lodge, and, they would teach me how to sing in Lakota. They would teach me how to pray. And it was a really sacred place to me. And just another couple miles down the way was Eldora Ski Area, which was, one of the first places I'd gone back to, and the place where I had learned to ski as I was a kid. And I probably went to that lodge for 2 or 3 years before I had the courage to tell all of them that I also skied at the ski hill down the way. And the reason why this is probably like something that strikes some of you in the crowd when I got up on stage and started speaking Lakota, is I'm no stranger to the fact that I can show up to a space and not necessarily strike someone as like, this guy is Native American, this guy is Lakota. It's no mystery to me, I own a mirror. And so when I first came to Lodge, when I first came to learn my own culture, I came in this space of constantly having to prove that I belong there, that I belong to my own people. And when I showed up to the ski hill down the way, in my skis that were too small, and my jacket that I was holding together with duct tape, I also had to prove that I belonged there. And it wasn't an easy thing to do. That's a lot of what my life has been, is being stuck between two spaces, being stuck between two worlds. And it wasn't until there was a day that my uncles, they gave me this bucket, and they sent me to the creek. And they're starting the fire for the Sweat Lodge. The rocks are in there, they're crackling, and I go to this little gurgling creek behind the Sweat Lodge, and I dip this bucket in. And it's probably March or so at the time, and so in Colorado, the skies are piercingly blue, and the sunshine is incredibly warm, and it's starting to melt this creek, and it's starting to flow again despite the snowpack that surrounds me in the forest there. And I dip this bucket into the creek, and I look at the creek, and it leads right back to the ski hill. And something really struck me in this moment of this water that I'm about to bring to this ceremony I'm learning. this is the water I was just skiing on. I've been up there all season, making these turns, falling in love with this sport, and I'm meeting these exact same molecules again that know me as someone with, pieces of wood on my feet. So I take the bucket into the sweat lodge, and my uncles start dipping the buffalo horn into the bucket, and they're talking about this ceremony that we're about to do. And if you've never been in a Inipi, a Lakota sweat lodge, to paint the picture for you, there's no picture. It's completely dark when you sit inside, right? So dark that you can't see anything. Only between rounds, when they open the door to let the steam out of the lodge, is when there is enough light to even see in there. And so I hear the sounds of the water dipping in the bucket. He would fill the buffalo horn and then pour the water back into there. And it's getting hotter and hotter in this lodge. There's a pile of rocks in the center that have been heated by a fire for hours. And it's important that we do these protocols in a certain way, right? If you brought a fire itself into a lodge like that, you would extinguish all the oxygen in a moment, right? And even still, in this choking heat, it feels hard to breathe, and there's a tension in the air, right? And my uncle, he turns and he says, "Don't have fear that you won't be able to breathe in this lodge, because this ceremony, this anikagapi, it is the making of a new breath, right? And when we pour this water onto these rocks, now we have this understanding, right? To put it into this English language, which is tricky in the tongue, but sometimes a helpful tool. Sometimes we know that this water, right, is H2O. So have no fear that you're going to run out of that O, that oxygen that you breathe when you're inside this lodge, because when we pour this water onto the rocks and it makes this steam, it releases a new breath. It releases fresh oxygen into this space. And that's why we call this ceremony this, because we're making new oxygen, we're making new breath, we're making new life in here. And so he pours the water onto those rocks, and I hear the steam hiss. And I have this realization for the first time as I take in this deep, wet, labored breath, that the molecules that I've met before on this hill in the form of snow are now coming into my body as my breath. And that this isn't the first time that I'm meeting them. And not only am I meeting these molecules, but they're becoming me, right? My body can't survive without this oxygen, without this breath in this moment. And we sing our songs and we sweat in there for 4 rounds. And as we're in there, you're not allowed to drink water. And so when you step out after the 16th song, after the 4th door, you're parched. You've been singing, you've been breathing, you've been sweating for hours. And my uncle hands me that same buffalo horn, and it's full of water. And I take it and I say, "Mini wichoni," and I drink this water. And in Lakota, and maybe some of you are familiar with this from the Standing Rock movement, Mini wichoni became a mantra, a tagline, a call to change the world, to change all of our priorities. And it means water is life. And in this moment, I gained this understanding that maybe I'd had in an 8th grade chemistry lesson, but had never really embraced into my being, which was I'm 60% water. And this water comes from this snowpack that surrounds me, right? This water is in this eternal cycle, right? So most of what I am is actually really not my own. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to places like Spirit Mountain. It belongs to places like Eldora. It belongs to places like Gichigumi, this lake that you have over here, right? And we're just for a moment borrowing it so that we can be alive. And for me, as a Lakota, I got to realize this in this way in this lodge, right? And this is something that's central to, our cultural understanding, the education that every, man and woman and child would have had in a place just like this just a couple hundred years ago. These were our foundational lessons of what it means to be alive. To be alive is to drink water. It's more essential than any job. It's more essential than money. The only thing that you could last longer without is a breath of air. And in this moment, I realized it's something that I'd been taking for granted as a skier. Something that I just had the privilege of maybe sharing even what felt like the best days of my life with, but not realizing that it was the thing that also made my life possible. And this for me was the first time that I felt comfortable to step out of the sweat lodge and to tell my relatives around me, I'm a skier. I've known this water in another way. I've done another ceremony with it. I've done a different dance with these same elements. And I think that there's something deeply interconnected about the two. And at that point in my life, I didn't really know exactly what to do with it. But that's something that came a little bit later for me. Would you guys go to the next? Oh, wait, I have a thing for this. I'll be asking there. Yeah. So this is me now. This is what I get to do. And I'm here because I got to make a film a few years back, which is called Spirit of the Peaks. I think I mentioned that earlier. And for me, that film was really inspired by these kind of experiences and realizing at the same time that my culture's given me a really incredible insight. At the same time, my people's territory kind of ends at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. It wasn't really a place, that we went. And I found myself kind of sharing one day these maps of our traditional territory and how far we go. And, it extends into the northeast corner of Colorado where I live. And I posted this online, and there was a Ute kid who sent me a DM on Instagram, and he was like, "You guys sure you came into Colorado? Like, I'm pretty sure this is all Ute territory down here." And it could have devolved into an intertribal argument in the comments section on Instagram. But instead, it turned into a friendship, and that guy Bird Red became an amazing friend of mine, and I'll get to where that led him here in just a little bit. But it really led me to dig at the history of the state of Colorado. Because for me as a Lakota, I was really familiar already with my own history. Bear with me for a sec. I was really familiar with my own history as a Lakota of our treaties, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1858 and 1868 and blah, 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 all these things, how it played into our history, how the Black Hills were a place that we were promised in perpetuity, right? There's a funny thing that a lot of native tribes did as they signed treaties across the country. They would put these terms on them of how long these treaties should last. And nation to nation, we kind of found this same time frame that we would put on it, which was we wanted these lands for as long as the rivers run and as long as the grasses grow. And as we can see, as we stand here today, it's not rivers and grass who's forgotten their promises, but instead the the U.S. government itself, who's forgotten Article 6 of their own constitution, which is that treaties are the supreme law of the land, and they can't be negated by any act of Congress or anything like that. But unfortunately, most all of our lands were legislated away. So now we're going to get a little more modern with it. We're going to pull up a meme. And hopefully this allows us just a little bit of context to understand where we're at in this economic system, or at least where we're at from my perspective of it as an indigenous person, right? Which is, nowadays our world runs on dollars and cents, and once upon a time those were actually like made of physical paper and, backed by gold that was in a vault somewhere. And instead now we kind of have like the US petrodollar, which isn't really backed by anything other than like, the threat of violence in the Middle East or something like that. But I think it's really important for us to understand that as we operate our economy, the origin of every dollar that we have it was something material enough for us to see value in it, right? So when it was a gold-backed currency, that gold was pulled from places like the Black Hills of South Dakota, right? That gold was pulled from the mountains of California. And as the gold rush happened in California, they had a law in their state that anyone could murder an Indian at any time for any reason, right? And this is 1849 in California, not all that long ago, right? And then all those bits of gold are pulled from the hills there. The bits of iron are pulled from the hills here. Things that materially were the land itself become dollars, right? And the other source of all the monetary value that props up the system that we have originated in stolen labor for folks who were in the South on plantations. People stolen from another continent who were brought here to work, right? And now these two things, these monetary values that we're pursuing, are unfortunately the lifeblood of the economy that sustains us all, right? Most of us here, right? How many times have we mentioned, like Dick, we would rather be out paddling today. Unfortunately, the paddle that they gave him is too short for him to paddle away. Otherwise, he might rather leave because it's a sunny day, right? But I think our recreation economy is this really important place where we start to look at this again, right? Because what are we selling in this recreation economy? We're selling access to native land. We're selling freedom to go outside and to be people again, right? We'd all rather be running. We'd all rather be skiing. We'd all rather be doing these things. But unfortunately, we have to work, right? When most of us have to work for someone who isn't us, someone who's going to make more money off our work than we're going to make off of our own work. And I think that these are really important things for us to evaluate, as we create solutions for ourselves, as we create a new economy for ourselves, and as we decide that the land that we didn't turn into dollars is actually the most valuable thing that we have. Oh, I appreciate that. I'm gonna keep going though, even though you clapped. I felt really good. I was thinking about leaving and going running or back over to Spirit Mountain. But to take things back to Ute territory, to Colorado, and to the decisions that I found in front of myself. As I'm arguing with Bird Red, what I decided to do instead was look up the history of Colorado, look up the history of our treaties there. And And what I found was that in 1858 in Colorado, because the mountains of Colorado were viewed as so rugged and so remote and so damn cold, everything west of the Continental Divide in the state of Colorado was promised to the Ute tribe in perpetuity. And if you're familiar with the geography of Colorado, there's only one ski area nowadays that is to the east of that Continental Divide. Maybe except for Wolf Creek in the south is like kind of right on the divide. But I found it really interesting to me as a skier that now my economy that I'd tied myself into, my job, which becoming a pro skier was such a dream job that it wasn't even something I had the opportunity to dream of in most of my life. It was a dream that was too far beyond reach to even dream. This incredible opportunity is in front of me, and I realized that the only way for me to realize my own opportunity is to violate this treaty that's promised to the Ute people. I've got to work with these brands who, you know, Icon Pass, who sells access to all of these ski areas to the west of the Continental Divide in Colorado. And it was a dilemma to find myself in. And I don't think there was any perfect way forward, but in the film Spirit of the Peaks, the determination that I came to is that what I was going to do was try to make a message that united everyone who skis, everyone who loves these places around these values that we share and these natural truths of the situation which apply to all of us, no matter who we are. Because my own ability to indigenize myself through learning my culture was aided by skiing. I couldn't have done it without the sport. And I had a feeling that if given the context, if I'd put any of you in that sweat lodge next to me, and I'd put any of you right next to me on the chairlift, and you'd shared those two same experiences, you would have come out of it indigenized a bit yourself. Because you don't have to be native for that breath of oxygen that comes in your lungs to come from that forest right down the street, right? You don't have to be Lakota or Ojibwe for the water that's in your veins to have come from the snow that falls on these hills here or on the mountains in my backyard. That truth is inalienable for all of us, and in reality, I think it's something that is far more important to our survival as a species, quite frankly. And you know, it's hard to take it to that level sometimes and be like, it's scary to look at where we're at. And also, we all know the stakes of elections that are happening in just a couple weeks, right? And so for me, that's really my goal with the work that I do, is that I hope every one of you succeeds in what you're doing and gets more people out onto the land, that you find more time yourself to be out there on incredible trails and in these incredible spaces, so you can experience being human again, so you can remember where the water in your veins comes from, where the air in your lungs comes from, and that you can feel that connection to that. In Lakota, we call that mitakuye o yase, which means, you know, all my relations, that we're all related. But in another very real sense, I think it means that we're all one thing. The water that I get a drink now, just visiting in your little place, is going to become a part of me. And there's mineral particulates that came from your aquifers, your hills, your rivers, your stones, that are going to absorb into my bones and into my body, and I'll carry this place with me forever after I leave here. And all of that is embedded in you by being here. And if you come to ski in my backyard, then you drink my water, and a piece of that becomes part of your body and what you take with you. And so not only are we related to these places that we've seen as resources, but in the most real sense, in the most scientific sense, not just Indian spirituality, but raw chemistry and biology, we are these places in which we recreate. They are not just our resources, they're our children, right? And they're our parents. And we are in this material cycle with all of them. And what we get to do now is maybe, build community or sell a bit of access or share a little piece of that experience. But what that experience really is the experience to be human. And that's really my invitation to all of you here today, as you network with one another, as you create new opportunities, as you have a conversation that sparks something that will become tangible and real in the future. It is just to take that understanding with you. Take that feeling of your best day riding a bike at Spirit Mountain or along the Cogs Trail or running out there, and the connectedness that you feel when you're doing that into every interaction that you have, into every dream that you dream together, into every possibility that's out there. Know that that is what we're really striving for. Yes, you might realize some awesome economic potential for your community along the way, but what you're truly doing is tying yourselves and one another even more deeply to this ecology. And that's what it means to be alive. All right, so I have just a few minutes left, and I want to just answer a couple quick questions or one or two long ones if there's folks out there. Yep. And Hansi's got the mic for someone if there's a couple questions out there about, what does this look like tangibly, any of those kind of things. I'm stoked to share with you all.
Hi, my name is Melody, and I am a sea kayak guide and instructor, and I've been thinking about how to bring a lot of what you're talking about into the groups that I work with, because I feel like we blast into the Apostle Islands, we hike loudly down the trail, we come back, and I've been thinking about how to bring reciprocity into it. But I think it's also really important to bring a lot of the message of what you're saying to these groups so that other bigger groups of people are starting to talk about this and to feel this deeply. And I'm wondering if you have, what would you recommend in terms of sharing some of this respectfully in ways that are not appropriating as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the biggest thing, and to kind of quote a friend of mine in a story that I wrote for Patagonia's The Cleanest Line, is help people start with appropriating giving a shit. You know what I mean? Because in a lot of ways, like, that's where native cultures begin, and I think a lot of us would feel a lot less hurt by the appropriation that happens in the incorrect sharing of our culture, if the people who it's shared with first shared our values. And as I kind of shared, like, our values start with things that are very real material realities. So I don't know how long your days and your trips are as in doing the kayaking, but if they're multiple days, I think the most simple things starts with, like, can you help people to drink water and eat food from the place? And if that's not a material possibility with what you're doing, can you explore, like, why that is? because we're all made of this planet. Every molecule of your body was once somewhere else on the planet, in some other organism, in some other mineral deposit, whatever it might be. And the ability to not drink the water some places. Things as simple as that, I think are kind of the path to like understanding the difference between our cultural values that we have currently and the cultural values that indigenous folks had. And so I guess I'll share like a quick anecdote of like what we do. I work with Winter Park Resort. That's where I live in Colorado. And one of the things that we've done to help everybody on the mountain have this experience, we started with having like run names that were in Arapaho language. First, they were named by the Arapaho. Then we added signage in the Arapaho language. We added this art. We added an educational aspect to the fact that to our snow stake, which like measures how much it snows each night and tells people if it's going to be a powder day. But we realized like all of that participation was kind of elective. Like people still had to take it upon themselves to get involved. And so the next step that we took was working with an indigenous company called Takabe to do our food services on mountain. So now if you get a cup of chili at the top of the mountain, you're eating bison that was grown by indigenous ranchers. The tepary beans that are in the chili were grown by native folks in the southern edge of Colorado. And so in the most real sense, we plugged people back into these indigenous food systems and made it so that if you got to buy this damn overpriced cup of chili at the ski hill, the money that's going into that is also actually empowering indigenous food systems across the country. So if you're so-and-so visiting from Texas and I could give a hoot about all that, I'm just here to see the mountains for the first time. Well, guess what? I've still got you economically contributing to building indigenous food systems across the country because our food supplier works with native farmers and ranchers to restore those traditional practices across the country. So maybe for you, it's as simple as, plugging in with Ojibwe folks and, purchasing some manoomin from their, sustainable agricultural program that they've got going and serving that while you're on a sea kayak trip and being able to say, this is what this place used to be made of. This was a food lake. And just getting people to understand that for the first time. Yeah. We've got time for maybe like one more quick one. I'll get you later. He couldn't see your hand go up. You come find me.
I put my hand up high and fast. Hi, I'm Danny. I'm with Wilderness Inquiry. I think you talked a little bit just now about some of those solutions that you've put forward and some of the actions that are being taken. But I'd be curious to hear how, and the framework for this, right, is hope is a powerful tool to envision our collective future. So what gives you hope with the work that you're doing? And what drives it?
Oh, I love this. It's like we coordinated this. That's great. For me, the biggest thing is I've worked with a lot of tribes, and now I work with Icon Pass and all my sponsors. Everybody who sponsors me, sponsors the programs that I work with, sponsors my community. And so what I'm able to do, last year I spent 25 days of my season that I was out skiing with indigenous folks who are learning to ski or who are like really badass skiers and just like want to get to the level that I'm at. And what really gives me hope along the way of that is all the kids that I get to work with. I ski with the kids at Taos Pueblo. We bring native kids up from Denver to Winter Park. And it's all the kids that I ski with who love it, who are never going to become professional skiers, right? Because what I want is for the indigenous kids who are going to grow up to become a scientist, right? These two kids that I ski with often, Ampetu and Tongshi, they're like scientists. When you just talk to people and their gears are just turning in a way where you're like, oh yeah, you're incredible. You're going to change the world someday. What really matters to me is that kid gets to go skiing. that kid gets this experience being outside in this way. And I got to have their first powder day with them. And the way they light up and understand the world on a day like that, and then I get to say to them, like, this is also Miniwichoni. This water is going to flow down to you in Denver, and you're going to drink it, and you're going to understand this same thing that I've shared with you all about it. For the indigenous scientists of the future to have that understanding, that to me is what gives me hope. And in our Icon Pass scholarship, we award scholarships to Native adults as well. And this year, we got to pick this woman, Lydia. She should come give your keynote next year. She's amazing. She's an indigenous soil scientist at Dartmouth. And Dartmouth has a huge ski community and all these things. And this year, the girl who's an indigenous scientist gets to go on the Dartmouth ski trip with all the Ivy League bros. And that to me is what gives me hope. It's just every time I get to put one of these indigenous people who got to have all the education that I didn't, who can change the world in all the ways I dream of when I read an article about climate change or deforestation or whatever, and there's someone who's working on that, and I get to help them ski. That to me is the thing that gives me so much hope, because when you learn that process of there's a mountain in front of me and it's terrifying, and you get to learn, oh my gosh, I can visualize, here's my way up it, here's my way down it, here's how I'm going to do all this, and literally overcoming mountains in your life becomes something tangible that you do, then all the mountains that they're going to have to climb and all the ones they might find themselves sliding down ahead of them, it's not like a foreign experience. It's not unfamiliar to them. And that just gives me so much hope and just, I think, brings things, back into reciprocity, those moments when I get to play a little role in bringing indigenous people back home to these places where they belong.
Awesome.